Welcome, Age of Vintage Society. Rod Taylor was an early pioneer in what would much later become a flood of talented actors from Australia, taking on leading roles in Hollywood. He was an Aussie guy who looked at Hollywood and thought, yeah, he could do that too. Why Rod Taylor hated James Bond movies. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Rod Taylor, the last of Hollywood hellraisers. In the 1950s, Hollywood was filled with suave and stylish stars like Cary Grant and William Holden, and the brooding method actors like Marlon Brando and James Dean. And then there was Rod Taylor, who was in a class all his own. By most people's standards, Rod Taylor had a pretty great career, including starring roles in Hitchcock's The Birds and the original The Time Machine, and all the way through to working with Tarantino, the Australian actor whose brawny good looks made him a leading man for films ranging from westerns to romantic comedies. Handsome Australian actor who came to Hollywood in the 1950s and built himself up from a supporting actor into taking the lead in several well-remembered movies. At a time when Australians could rarely see or hear themselves on screen, Rod Taylor helped keep his country in the public eye and paved the way for the Aussie actors who followed him. In the years between Errol Flynn's death and Mel Gibson's emergence, Rod Taylor was the archetypical Australian movie star, fighting villains on screen and winning notoriety for his alcohol-fueled fights off-screen. Though he usually played American characters, complete with US accent, his roles in such films as The Time Machine, The Birds and Zabriskie Point showed a rugged, dashing character who seemed distinctly Australian, or at least a reflection of how Australian males liked to see themselves. "I'm about the only Australian in movies who doesn't pretend to be something else," he said in 1976. Flynn pretended he was American. Peter Finch pretends he's a Pommy. Merle Oberon says she was not born in Tasmania. In fairness, Flynn had become a US citizen. Finch was indeed English-born, and Oberon was actually born in India. But Taylor's point was clear. Even when he himself became a US citizen in 1982, he continued to fly the Australian flag. With a career spanning 6 decades, Australian actor Rod Taylor had many opportunities to prove his abilities as a performer in film, TV, theatre and radio. He won the Roller Award, offered by 2UE to the year's best radio actor, which offered a return ticket to England. While many Australian actors of the time would eventually move in England, Taylor's journey quickly diverted him to Hollywood. Though he never had the starry cachet of Cary Grant, Rock Hudson or James Garner, the good looks of Rod Taylor, at once charming and rugged, made him an ideal leading man both for romantic comedies and action films. This video is about the thrilling story of a working-class Sydney boy who went to Hollywood, took on the Americans at their own game on their own turf in one of the toughest industries there is, and won. It's also the story of a talented actor who was almost brought down by the demons of alcohol and ego, but who ultimately overcame them to triumph, a must for all Rod Taylor fans. He was born in the Sydney suburb of Lidcombe on January 11, 1930, the son of commercial artist Bill Squizzy Taylor and his wife Mona, a writer with a fondness for the Ouija board. Taylor had early exposure to the creative arts from his mother, a writer of more than 100 children's stories, and his father, a construction contractor who also worked as a commercial artist. Taylor picked up his father's knack for visual design, working at Mark Foy's department store painting window displays as he studied graphic arts at East Sydney Technical and Fine Arts College. Working as a lifesaver in his spare time, Rodney showed promise as an engineer, winning several awards at Technical College. Undeniably, however, Taylor also loved acting. In his spare time he would take drama classes and participate in small-scale theatrical productions like Julius Caesar at the Independent Theatre in 1950 and The Vigil at John Alden Co. Taylor got married around this time to a woman named Peggy Williams, though he would later remark that they were far too young at the time to create a healthy marriage. He wavered between his two crafts until he had a formative experience watching a performance of Richard III by none other than Sir Laurence Olivier and his touring Old Vic theatre troupe. Taylor was so inspired by the production that he made up his mind to pursue acting full-time. Taylor quit college to become an actor, painting backdrops for a store fashion display as he waited his big break. He didn't have to wait long. He became famous in 1954 playing Tarzan in the 2UE radio serial. Perhaps more prestigiously, he played a less whimsical hero, Douglas Tinlegs Barder, in Morris West's adaptation of Reach for the Sky. Taylor, something of a method actor, recorded one scene hobbling around the studio on crutches. For radio, this was beyond the call of duty. It was a seminal year in Taylor's career. He proved that he was more than just a voice with his first feature film, King of the Coral Sea. Even alongside Chips Rafferty, Taylor stood out, partly because he was bare-chested throughout the film. Recently divorced from Williams, Taylor parlayed his win into a trip to Hollywood, where he set to work breaking into the mainstream film industry. He was soon to be seen on American television in such series as Cheyenne, and he was considered for the lead role in Maverick, which went eventually to James Garner. Then, after a series of supporting roles, he landed the part of H.G. Wells, the time traveller who falls in love with Yvette Mimieux 800,000 years in the future, when humanity has split into two mutually hostile species, in George Pal's highly regarded adaptation of H.G. Wells's novel The Time Machine. Establishing his dashing matinee idol looks rather than his acting flair, it would become perhaps his most fondly remembered role. Pal had originally considered casting a middle-aged Brit, such as David Niven or James Mason, but needing someone of a more athletic and idealistic bent gave Taylor his first big role. To nobody's surprise, he became the star of a television action series, Hong Kong, which gave him an organised fan club, composed mostly of young women, and a fanzine, Rod Law. Columnist Hedda Hopper listed him as one of Hollywood's 21 most promising stars, and Photoplay magazine called him a breath of fresh air in a stale air town. Nonetheless, Hong Kong was a full start, axed after 26 episodes. Rod Taylor's refusal to play Bond was one of the things that haunted him throughout his career, stating, "Producer Cubby Broccoli wanted me to screen test for James Bond when he was preparing Dr. No in 1961. I refused because I thought it was beneath me. I didn't think Bond would be successful in the movies. That was one of the greatest mistakes of my career. Every time a new Bond picture became a smash hit, I tore out my hair. Cubby and I have laughed about it ever since." There are not many actors who would say no to James Bond, but apparently there are more than you think. Taylor starred with some of Hollywood's top leading stars, including Doris Day, Jane Fonda, James Garner, Eva Marie Saint, Glenn Ford, Maggie Smith, and even Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor in the star-studded VIPs. He had the rare quality of versatility. He wasn't only handsome or suave, he could be intellectual, gruff, a likeable bad guy, a killer, an adventurer, a romancer, or a man of action. The film's success skyrocketed Taylor's fame to a new level, and he would appear in several more prominent movies from that period, including The Birds, 1963. But he wasn't Alfred Hitchcock's first choice to play Mitch Brenner, the lawyer who falls for Tippi Hedren's socialite in his adaptation of the Daphne du Maurier short story about an avian invasion. The Bird's scriptwriter Evan Hunter recalled a conversation before the film had been cast. "Well, the girl should be Grace, of course, but she's in Monaco being a princess, isn't she?" Hitchcock told him. "And for the man, Carrie, of course. But there are only two stars in this picture, the Birds and me." The Birds, as an audacious use of science fiction apocalypse to dramatise emotional insecurity, and Taylor's permanent air of being slightly troubled fitted the mood perfectly. But he was taken aback to be offered the role. "I got this call out of the blue from Mr. Hitchcock and was totally amazed," he recalled. "And being a brash young brat, I guess I didn't show any kind of respect that I was supposed to, and I think he kind of liked it. I said, I hope the birds and things don't kind of totally outshadow the people. Of course, that's the story. They're supposed to." but then we really talked about making movies and how I loved it, and we just got on extremely well. I was absolutely flattered and astonished." Hitchcock famously, or notoriously, treated Hedren, the model making her acting debut, atrociously during filming, but Taylor helped her through. "Rod was a great pal to me and a real strength," she said. "We were very, very good friends. He was one of the most fun people I've ever met, thoughtful and classy. There was everything good in that man." The iconic Hitchcock thriller would come on the heels of Taylor's second marriage to Mary Hillam, with whom he would give birth to a daughter, Felicia, in 1964. While this marriage would also end in divorce in 1969, Taylor's career remained successful, with roles in landmark films and TV shows. Off-screen, he continued maintaining Australia's reputation for hard-drinking, hard-living Hollywood actors. Errol Flynn is alive and well, but these days his name is Rod Taylor, announced Sydney's Daily Mirror in 1972. Taylor did not try to deny this. "I make love to as many women as will let me. If a girl gives me half a chance, I'll bed her down, and that's the truth." Professionally as well, he maintained his Australian link, expressing frustration whenever non-Australian actors were cast as Aussies. He occasionally played Australians himself. Maggie Smith's boyfriend in The VIPs, Outback Police Detective Scobie Malone in Nobody Runs Forever. In all the rest, he complained, "I've been a phony American." "I want to make movies about Australia to be shown to people all over the world," he said during a home visit in 1968. "It annoys me to talk to people overseas who are surprised we have not only kangaroos but telephones. I think I've built up a pretty good international reputation. I'm lucky enough to have some sort of status, and I want to use it to help Australian films." Proving his support for national culture, in the early 1970s he saved the Australian Opera, now Opera Australia, with a $250,000 donation. Setting up a film production company, Rod Law, he visited Australia often during the 1970s. By then the film renaissance was underway, and he received top billing playing a Texan in The Picture Show Man, though the actual star was John Mylan. His contribution to the Renaissance, however, was somewhat limited. Back in the US, where he owned a Beverly Hills mansion and a ranch in Arizona, the small screen still beckoned. He would marry again in 1980 to Carol Kikamura, a woman Taylor had dated back in the early 60s before she relocated to Las Vegas. After rekindling their relationship, he and Kikamura's union would last for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Taylor found ongoing success throughout the 80s on the shows Masquerade and Falcon Crest. The 90s found Taylor acting in movies like Open Season and on shows like Walker, Texas Ranger and Murder, She Wrote. He had retired from acting. "Pretending to still be the tough man of action isn't dignified for me anymore," he said in 1987. "There comes a time when you're over the hill and there are plenty of great-looking younger actors who can take your place." When Quentin Tarantino tempted him back onto the big screen for a well-regarded cameo as Winston Churchill in Inglourious Bastards. "I love to see a Rod Taylor performance in a film, because he always adds something extra with his presence. While I have seen most of his feature films, I learned several new things, such that he had his own television series, and he was such an accomplished artist." Rod Taylor died in Los Angeles of natural causes on January 7, 2015, at the age of 84. Despite a stellar career that many would envy, he wasn't one to live in the past. I don't revel in the memorabilia at all. I'm interested in what's coming next. Taylor was one of the first actors to be so openly Australian, while others tried to act more British. His Australian pride really shone through, especially as he discussed how certain films or shows were popular in his home of Australia. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of Rod Taylor? Regardless of the film genre, Taylor always came across as a man of action and charm in spy thrillers, dramas and romantic comedies.